Welcome. We were talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, Corey Nathan. It's an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Thanks, as always, to Pew Research Center for making today's conversation possible, as well as to our really good friends at the Village Square. We love those folks. And now, we're already in it. So I am just happy to be joined today by John Noltner. John is here as part of our ongoing series that highlights Weavers. Weave, the social fabric project, tackles the problem of broken social trust that has left Americans divided, lonely, and in social gridlock. Weave connects, supports, and invests in local leaders stepping up to weave a new, inclusive fabric, social fabric where they live. And John is an award-winning author and photographer who's worked on 5 continents, gathering stories of human courage, grace, and resilience. He's produced projects for national magazines, Fortune 500 companies, and nonprofit organizations. A Piece of My Mind reflects John's belief that storytelling and art can help individuals, organizations, and communities articulate their deepest values and encourage action toward building community connections and positive change. That's crazy. Who told you
Who
you could do
does
anything
that,
like
Corey?
that? Yeah.
Who does that? Why might that even work in the world that we live in today?
Seriously. So first of all, you said before I actually did hit record where you are. So could you share with folks where you're at in the world currently?
Yeah, I'm in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of stuff going on in our world today.
Yeah. So I've heard. So in all seriousness, how are things on the ground there currently?
Uh, Things are tough. I mean, I've got a really broad network of people who are feeling that I'm connected to, that are feeling some pressure, that are having trouble getting through their day-to-day lives, and I don't know when this is going to air, but today is February 6th that we're recording this. And, there's some news that's shifting. It sounds like there's going to be a small drawdown of some of the federal agents that are here. It feels like maybe some of the immediacy of the crisis is waning. I'm not going to say it's feeling past,
Yeah.
but time will tell what unfolds, but there's tension, there's concern, there's worries about some of the most vulnerable folks in our community and how this is impacting them. For yet another time, we find our beloved state of Minnesota and our city of Minneapolis being in the spotlight nationally and internationally.
Now I know you went to school in Wisconsin, but you were born in Minnesota, or is that where you're from?
No, I was born in Wisconsin. I'm a cheesehead. If I followed sports at all, I suppose I would follow the Packers, but I don't follow sports at all.
Okay.
But my wife and I moved to Minnesota. Yeah, I went to school at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire, which is just an hour and a little bit east of here. Um, and we moved to the Twin Cities back in 1991 with plans on staying for 2 years, and it has become home.
I feel you,
So
man. I moved
we're
to where I am in 1995 with a plan of like 6 years max, and here I am,
there you
however many
are.
years
Yeah.
later.
Yeah,
Um,
we can talk about this more too, but during the pandemic, my wife and I sold our house in Minnesota. We bought a van that we named Vinnie Van Gogh, and we spent 2.5 years living full time on the road, gathering stories of hope, healing, and human connection. Um, and we love the mountains and we love the coast. And I cannot believe that at the end of those 2.5 years, we decided to settle where there are neither of those things, neither mountains nor coast. We came back to Minnesota because it's home, because it's where our people are, because we love the spirit of this place.
well, I'll get to a lot of that, but since I don't want to leave Minneapolis yet, I don't want to leave Minnesota yet.
Yeah.
I was just looking at a bunch of, they're not just photographs of people, they're not just faces. The word that comes to mind is I was beholding a countenance of of individual human beings. There
Mm.
was something about the artwork that I was looking at that you really, does that make sense what I'm saying? You captured a countenance. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm with you. I've also heard it described as a great cloud of witnesses. These are soul moments. These are black and white portraits that I've done of some of the people of Minnesota over these last several weeks.
Yeah.
To try to capture some of the face, to try to capture some of the humanity, and to try to celebrate who we are as humans.
Yeah. Um, so what are there's a lot because I mean I had to sit with each one and I think I was at least a few dozen photos in, and I just had to sit with each one. I'm curious about some of the stories. Are there one or two stories of some of the? It's called I Am Human. That's a series that you've been doing
Yeah.
in recent weeks. That a couple of stories that jump out at you.
Well, let me say this. I'll give you a little bit more background of it. I'm a photographer and storyteller. I feel like I need to use my craft to respond to some of the immediacy of the things that are going on in the world. The project is really rooted in this notion that in a divided world, we can use storytelling and art to rediscover what connects us. We sometimes politics and sometimes words and sometimes facts and statistics fail us.
Hmm.
And when that happens, I believe that art can help us see things in new ways, that it can open a space where we can consider new possibilities, where we can recognize the humanity of others in different ways. This is not a passive process, and it's also not a Pollyanna process, right? This is about grappling with the hard realities of our day and making a choice about how we can live better together, about how we can see one another, about how we can be patient to encounter some of the difference that's around us. So I had no idea how I would use this to respond to what's going on in Minneapolis right now. But then it occurred to me at its very basic level, some of the rhetoric and some of the anger and frustration that's going on in the world right now is because of an inability to see the humanity of one another. We're simply slapping on labels and we're making decisions and we're putting people in boxes. And there's a lot of ugly that can ripple out from that process. And what I wanted to use my work to do is to remember that humanity, to highlight, to celebrate, to amplify. And so we just started doing these portraits. We've got over 100 of them now, these beautiful, soulful black and white portraits. And we're dropping the words, I am human, on top of each one of them. And we're starting to project them out in public spaces as a simple process of seeing the humanity, of building community, of saying to people who may feel under pressure and marginalized and so on in these days just as a simple way of saying, I see you, I hear you, and you matter, and standing in solidarity with those folks.
And I kind of a hard question because it was more convicting for me as I was looking at these photos and some of the things I've been thinking about and writing about recently. You know, we want to think about there's a very human quality with the first killing, Renee Good, of the breadcrumbs on the front seat and the stuffed animals on the floorboard. What I didn't think about until someone asked me was, have you tried to humanize the killer?
Mm.
I'm curious if you've had an opportunity to talk, not necessarily the folks who killed Alex and Renee, but any ICE officers. Have you had an opportunity to do any work with any of those folks?
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting question. And as of yet, I have not. Certainly open to it, but as you can imagine, people who are acting in an official capacity like that sometimes are reluctant to put their faces on a public art project.
Yeah.
This happened in the same way after George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, where I interviewed a lot of people out on the street. We simply asked them, "What do you want to say?" as a public art process. Um, I was making some really intentional efforts to include and interview some police officers at that stage of the game. There was nobody who wanted to go on the record and speak publicly and have their photograph taken and sign a release that says, yes, I want to participate in this project at that point.
Yeah.
I was able to find, Portland at that time also had a bunch of unrest, and this is when I was on the road in Vinnie Van Gogh, and so I was able to connect with a police officer in Portland who had dealt with some of the, I mean, I don't remember the number, but he had worked 180 some days in a row without a day off
Wow.
because of some of the unrest that was happening in Portland, and so we had a chance to interview Nathan as well as a part of that. And he very clearly said, look, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the police department. There's a lot of, when you talk about institutions, there's a lot of pressure about messaging and staying on message and don't say anything that might open up any questions. And so he was really bold to take that position, to sit down with me in a public interview like that. And he was also really clear that he was doing it as a human being and not as a spokesperson for the police department.
I,
So no, I have not yet included ICE officers in this project. I haven't encountered the place where that is easily accessible.
oh, there's the Cocker
You see my
Spaniel.
dog?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
love it.
my dog's name is Road Trip. Uh, we're trying to preordain him to be a good traveler because that's what we do.
That's awesome. That's
I
awesome.
told him I told him to stay out because I was doing a podcast, but he doesn't listen.
I know. We have Charles Mingus III, who just has a mind of he wants to participate in every conversation. So, uh,
That's nice.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to dismiss the seriousness of your question. I think it's a very valid question. Right now, we have been focused primarily on connecting with community organizations that we have relationships with. But that being said, I don't ask anybody their political affiliation. I don't ask this series that we're doing. I don't ask people their names. I don't ask people their contact information. I just say, you're a human. Do you want to stand here and be a part of this project? And they say yes or no.
Yeah. I would imagine over the years, because this is something that you sold your home when 2020 or 2021?
Yeah, 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. Who does that?
Who does that, man? I mean, I
I
would
should say it
imagine that.
was my wife's idea. She's a very smart woman. It was her idea. It took me about 3 seconds to say, yeah, let's do that.
Oh man, that would be great. I would love to live in an RV for a stretch,
You
but
should.
I don't know if Lisa could put up with me in that small of a
Also,
space.
I should point out I'm still married to the same woman.
Ain't it
Yeah.
great? Ain't it
So that's
great?
a win.
Well, a broader question that's sort of a follow-up to the prior one is, have you found that there are certain types of folks that are less open to the kinds of questions and the kind of work and the kind of conversations that you're having? I hate to make generalizations, but the folks who wear the red hats, for example, are they less open to these conversations, or are there any types of folks that that you've found are more calloused to even entering into a conversation like this or being photographed?
Yeah, I don't know if calloused is the right word, but maybe skeptical
Okay.
uh, would be the right word. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. Um, when we were on the road full time in Vinnie Van Gogh, when we were down along the border and I was um, doing stories about immigration back in 2020 and 2021. Um, it's really important to me for this process that we do interview a wide range of folks. So I want to interview people who are asylum seekers and who are activists, but I also want to interview local ranchers and I want to interview Border Patrol agents because to me, no single one of us has a lock on the truth, right? We all hold on to this thread of truth based on our own experience and the way we live in the world. What's really interesting to me, and here's some of that weaving language, when you start taking those individual threads that we all hold and then you weave them together and you see this bigger picture, that starts turning into a tapestry, a rich and sort of nuanced tapestry that looks more like the truth
Yeah.
when you start weaving all of those stories together. But that being said, when I was down in Arizona, down along Nogales, Arizona, this was at the change of the last administration. So uh, Trump was going out, Biden was coming in. The wall that Trump was building Biden said no, and the construction stopped. We happened to be at the wall, at the place where construction stopped, on the day when construction stopped. So, whatever your political affiliation, that felt like a rather epic, historic moment and place to be, that we got to be in that place. Now, while we were down there, we were staying uh, in a campground that was mostly filled with people who were ex-veterans or construction workers who were working on the wall. Now, you probably recognize the name of the project, A Piece of My Mind, PEACE. Sometimes when people hear the word peace and they hear the name of that project, they already assume left-wing hippie dude.
Yeah.
Um, and while I lean in that direction, that is not the full truth of who I am. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. But it occurred to me at that moment. Sorry, this is a longer story than it needs to be, but it occurred to me at that moment when we were in that campground that it would be really interesting to interview one of those construction workers who had just that day been put out of work because construction on the wall shut down. As it happened, there was a guy with Minnesota plates on his truck. And he saw my Minnesota plates, and the way it always happens in a campground, he's like, "Yo, Minnesota, how you doing? I'm from
Yeah.
Minnesota." And we started talking, and we had this really great conversation. Um, and I went and he had just been put out of work. He had moved his family down to that campground so that he could do work and support his family by building that wall, and that had just fallen apart for him. And I found him in the campground later that day and I said, "Hey, this is the project I'm working on, and it feels really important to me to include your voice because this is a unique perspective and a unique situation you find yourself in. Would you be open to that?" Of course, he's now wondering how to feed his family. He's feeling vulnerable. He's frustrated. He hears the name of my project, thinks maybe I'm one of those guys. And he decides he doesn't want to participate. He goes, "I don't want anything to do with that." So that to me was a loss
Mm.
because that to me would have been an interesting conversation. So I'm not going to paint with a broad brush across the whole swath of politics and humanity, but in that case, that was a loss where we didn't have the opportunity to hear from somebody that had a unique experience and a particular sort of grief in that moment. I think we all carry some form of grief and pain in the world, and it's important that we acknowledge that amongst one another's. And that was a loss because we didn't get to include that in the bigger body of work.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. We carry around pain and loss. How how do you protect yourself? I would imagine a lot of the work that you do, you're dealing, especially right now in around Minneapolis and Minnesota, more broadly speaking, that you're interacting with folks that are carrying around trauma. How do you protect yourself from inhabiting that trauma and taking on that trauma yourself and staying, I don't know, fresh every day? Do you know what I'm asking? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Oh, yeah, and it's a great question. And the easy answer is not very well, Corey.
Mm,
Um, I don't. Um, if you want to do human work well, if you want to do heart work and soul work well, there's a price to pay. And yeah, you do carry some of that trauma. I think somebody smarter than me once told me that they used to call that secondhand trauma. Now
yeah.
they just call it trauma.
Okay.
That there's not really a distinction, that you're one step removed from it, that if you sit with it and you're a compassionate soul and you hear some of it, you then embody some of it. And
Mm,
that's I think a true story. For me, I think human beings try to protect themselves from that sort of vulnerability. Human beings try to protect themselves from that sort of discomfort very often. But I also think when we do that, we also buffer ourselves against the very best form of human connection that we can find in life. Right.
mm,
So you put up these walls to theoretically protect yourself, but in the process, you also insulate yourself uh, from the richest sort of human connection that we can find. And does that include discomfort and pain? Yeah, it does. But to to avoid that and to hide from that and to protect yourself from it too much runs the risk of just sort of skipping along the surface and missing these really deep human connections that are available to us if we make ourselves vulnerable to it.
Yeah, yeah. I want to back up for a second because you have a few different hinge points in your personal and professional trajectory that are fascinating. So, you went to University of Wisconsin Eau Claire for journalism, right?
Yeah.
So where did the photography, were you studying photography as well, like photographic journalism or some, like how did the photography get going?
Yeah, I always loved photography. I never understood you can make a living at it, and I'm still not sure you can, but I loved storytelling. I loved journalism. What I liked about journalism is it seemed the other people in the program were just curious about everything, and so was I. And so that felt like a good place for me to sit. I liked writing, but I was particularly interested in photography. Turns out the University of Wisconsin didn't have a really strong photo degree. Sorry, UW-Eau Claire, but it wasn't their focus. They had a really good journalism program, so I got my degree in writing. But between the art and the journalism departments, I probably had 30 some credits of photography, so that became my focus. Um, by the time I figured out really what I wanted to do, I had met the woman who was going to become my wife someday. I didn't really want to transfer to another school. So I kind of just wrote it out. Nobody has ever asked to look at my resume. They just want to see my portfolio. So
Yeah.
I just practiced my craft. And I started working at a small daily paper in Wisconsin. Then I shifted over to Minnesota. I started doing commercial work. And that led me to this really unique place of wanting to do human storytelling, but wanting to produce it at a high production level. And so that sort of landed me in the magazine world. So I spent most of my career shooting for magazines and Fortune 500 companies.
It seems like at a certain point you forgive me if I'm not describing this the right way, but it seems like at a certain point your vocation you were more you were able to make the transition to an avocation as opposed to strictly a vocation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you're spot on. It has always been and remains to be a passion. And so in that mix, you're always making choices, right? You need to make enough money to eat, but you also got to feed your soul. And so we would always do this little dance where I would do enough work to make enough money to be okay, and then I would run over here and I would do these really personal passion projects that would feed my soul, but also help us go broke. And then I'd have to run over here and do the assignment work again. Over time, the idea is to have those swings be less dramatic. So now I'm at a place where I've been working on a piece of my mind for 17 years now. And now we're at a place where I really get to pursue my passion and do this storytelling work that I think has mission, vision, and values in the world. And that's all that I do.
Yeah. And the work is focused on it seems like you made a diagnosis of what's broken in the world. And a lot of your work is focused on healing what you've determined to be what's broken, right? So how did you start to come to that understanding? How did you start to come to that diagnosis?
Mm. When I was doing assignment work for magazines and newspapers, I would photograph AIDS patients one day and CEOs the next day and barge captains the day after that and musicians the day after that. And it was this really broad cross section of humanity, and I kind of loved it all. And I found beauty and wisdom in all of it. And then as I started paying more attention to some angry voices and some rhetoric saying, oh, those people over here, they're the problem because of this, or those people over there, they're a problem because of that. Uh, those were all people that I knew.
Mm.
They're talking about people who are friends or acquaintances or people I'd encountered, and that angry rhetoric never squared up with what I knew about those individuals who I'd encountered. I'm like, that doesn't make sense to
Yeah.
me. And so I mean, that was the diagnosis, I guess. The recognition that this angry rhetoric in the world was missing the mark, was oversimplified, was unfair based on the people who I had met and the groups that they came from. Um, I mean, obviously, I'm the poster child of privilege, right? I can't even say middle age. I mean, older white guy, college educated, live in the suburbs, married, cisgendered, two kids, dog named Road Trip, all of those things. The question is, what am I going to do with that privilege? I mean, I'm not going to fix the world. I recognize that, but in my understanding of peace, it's sort of a collective sort of peace. It's this notion that I'll be okay when we're all okay. But it's not just about me and making sure I have the resources that I need, but it's a more collective and communal sense of the common good and the beloved community that Dr. King talked about. And how do we make sure that everybody has access to the resources that they need in order to thrive? That doesn't mean writing a check to every person so that every bank account looks the same way, but it does mean treating people fairly, making sure that systems and structures are in place that treat people equitably. Um, and then the next question was, what skills do I have to respond to that? And I don't have an advanced degree. I don't have the secret meaning to peace. I don't have any secret answers. But I did have a curiosity. And so I just started doing these interviews and sitting down with people from these richly diverse backgrounds and building a conversation around the question, what does peace mean to you? How do you work towards it in your life? What are some of the obstacles you encounter along the way? Um, and when I do that, I have three audiences in mind. And the first is myself, because when I have the patience to sit in those conversations, not to debate or debunk, not to respond or refute, not to correct, coerce, or convince, but just to listen and understand. When I sit in those conversations, I always come away learning something new.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
So I'm the first audience. That's a little self-serving, but it's the truth. I'm
Okay.
I'm fascinated and I'm curious. When the second audience is the person who I'm interviewing, because very often those people do not share the same privilege that I have in the world. And so my goal at the end of the conversation is to for people to feel seen and heard and valued. For them to come out of the experience feeling whole, like they really got to tell their full truth. The third audience is the larger public because we take these stories and we've got four books, we've got five traveling exhibits, and we bring these stories around to try to help communities have conversations about conflict resolution and civic responsibility and social change. And I'm convinced that if I find some of these stories interesting, um, that probably other people will too.
Yeah. So how do you go from having a burden on your heart about, as you described a privilege, I would say, but also you described it in terms of your talents or gifts, or you could say blessings, and trying to harness those gifts in order to be a part of the solution in terms of what you're seeing. How do you go from there to selling your house, going on the road, launching this? Like, that's a pretty big step, man. That's pretty radical.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair. And the answer is one step at a time. I don't know. Who was
That's a
it?
big step. That's a
Yeah, it's a
leap.
pretty big step. But I don't know, was it Nelson Mandela? Who said, how do you eat an elephant? You eat it one bite at a time.
One bite at a time. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that Nelson Mandela?
It could have been. It could have been.
But you know the quote. You're familiar with it. Yeah. And so the real answer is if I had seen all of this coming down the pipeline, it would have been too horrifying to start. It would have felt too big. It would have felt excessive. Um, as it happens, we did a little step and then another step. I describe it often as walking down a foggy path where you can see like two steps ahead of you, but you can't see any further.
Yeah.
But when you take those two steps, the fog lifts a little bit and then you can see some more. And so
Yeah.
very early in the process, maybe because I'm stubborn, maybe because I don't know, uh, I decided if I could still see another step, I'd take it.
Yeah.
And so I did some stories. A friend said you should build a website. I'm like, but I don't know what it's gonna say. And he said, just start it and you'll figure it out as you go. And then people said, ooh, this would be a great exhibit. And so I found funding for an exhibit. And then people said, wow, I'd love to take these home and make a book. And so I made a book. And then people said, could you come and speak at our church? Could you come and speak at the Rotary Club about this project? I was horrified about public speaking. So I'm like, oh, I guess I need to learn how to do public speaking. And so I would talk to groups of 6 or 7, and my hands would be shaking and my voice would be trembling. But now I'll stand in front of 2,500 people, and it doesn't make me nervous because one step at a time. To the point where when we sold our house, our kids, I suppose, were 25 and 23 at the time, and we're looking at them going, "Is this weird? Does this freak you all out at all?" And they're like, "No, this seems like the normal thing that you would do."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is expected. And it just, people are like, oh, that's really brave, but it didn't feel brave. It felt like the natural next step of what we would do in the evolution of our lives as we're figuring out how to live in this complicated world.
So the way you describe seeing like one step or two steps ahead of you, uh, but also imagining that situation, taking that leap, which felt natural to you. But a lot of folks, we live in a world that prizes security or roots, if you will. How has being rootless actually helped you connect more deeply with the people that are your subjects?
That's a great question, Corey. No, they didn't tell me you were this smart when we started lined up the interview, but I love that. I love that question. And in to a certain extent, as we were traveling, we started feeling like we fit in everywhere. And at the same time, we kind of fit in nowhere, And so it was this really weird and fluid experience. But I think when you're feeling a little unsettled and when you're feeling a little bit detached as you travel around the country, a natural reaction to that is that you want to find connection. You want to find a place to belong. You want to find people to connect with. And so I think it opened us up a little bit more to encountering difference, at venturing into places that felt unfamiliar, at saying yes when an invitation opened up to us because we were hungry for that connection. Now remember, this is during the pandemic, and I think we all sort of collectively as humans were hungry for connection. And so I just think that that tenuous, unstable, slightly at risk sensibility as you're traveling through the world opens you up to other human connections. I really think if I came away from this experience with a couple of sort of thematic realizations, one is that we're all a little bit more vulnerable than we admit, and that we're all a little more deeply connected than we recognize.
Yeah. In looking at your work, what I'm what I'm seeing is I'm imagining the other side of the lens, right? I see the subject and I see the artwork and I see the descriptions and the stories and the conversations, but I'm also imagining the person, you, on the other side of the lens. And what I'm getting is a sense of reverence and wonder. It, is that, do you feel that? Is that something that you're aware of when you're shooting or,
Yeah, I am. And I mean, honestly, it warms my heart a little bit to know that that translates, that that's what comes through, because that's my experience. And it's also the experience of taking the photo, of being in that space, of being welcomed in, and people who have no reason to trust me, who choose to trust me and share these stories. And one thing that becomes really important to me in that process um, is that people feel like I'm honoring those stories, right? I mean, the media landscape is really diverse and in some ways really ugly. And there's a lot of extractive journalism that happens where people drop into a place and they grab these stories and they run away and they portray them in a way that may or may not feel authentic to the people who are in front of the camera. It's really important to me that the people who share their vulnerable stories with me. I mean, these are stories of domestic abuse, these are stories of terminal diagnosis, these are stories of drug addiction, of people who I've encountered, and they trust me to carry those stories and use them in a way that expresses integrity and respect and authenticity. And it's really important to me that they feel like that's honored. Um, as far as I know, our track record's sort of 100%. When I get to see these people again and I encounter them, uh, the answer is always one of two things. Either, yep, that's what I was trying to say that day, or you made me sound smarter than I thought I was. You know, and that's really important to me. When I interviewed a woman named Tanya Abid. She's a Anishinaabe woman, and she was protesting an oil pipeline going under the Mississippi River. And I interviewed her there. She was part of my most recent book, and like I always do, I sent her and everybody else who was featured in the book a copy of the book and said, "Thanks for being a part of this. I hope you're proud of it. I think we did something really beautiful here." And sometimes I hear back from people, sometimes I don't, but I hadn't really heard anything back from Tanya, which is fine. I don't expect it. But I was photographing about a year and a half later at a sober powwow. I was doing a series on addiction and recovery. There was a powwow that the Fond du Lac tribe hosted to celebrate sobriety. And while I was up there, somebody gives me a huge bear hug from behind. And I'm like, who's that? And I turned around and it was Tanya. And she had a big smile on her face and she said, "I got my book. I love my portrait. Thank you for letting me be a part of it." And those sort of ongoing connections and that sort of pride of people feeling like they're seen and heard and valued, that means a lot to me.
There's a subtle difference between someone feeling seen versus observed. And
Hmm.
again, when I look at the work, and especially when you listen to some of the recordings and read some of the conversations or read some of your writing, how do you make someone feel seen as opposed to observed? Do you know the
Yeah, I
distinction
feel
I'm?
that. I feel that difference. And one is more, I'm going to have the wrong language for it, but one feels more clinical and sort of
Yeah,
checklisty, and the other feels more human and,
connected.
and connected. And I, I don't really know the answer to that question, other than I think it's rooted in genuine curiosity.
Mm,
It's rooted in awareness of how much I don't know about the world. I know a lot about my own experience and my own sphere, and I can extrapolate and have empathy and compassion beyond it, but there are a lot of things I haven't encountered. Um, and so when I'm interviewing people, I'm not really sitting with a checklist and saying, "Okay, well, now tell me about this, tell me about that." I certainly am not showing up in a tie like I'm a professional that understands how the world works. More often, I'm showing up in a t-shirt and sandals and saying, "All right, let's figure this thing out together,"
yeah,
and trying to do everything I can to reduce the barriers to people being honest and authentic. That being said, in the interviews, and you said this to me early on in the green room, some of my favorite questions are just, "Well, what do you mean by that?"
yeah,
Or, "Can you tell me more?" Just because people will drop these little breadcrumbs, people will say these things that kind of land like a little bombshell, and or they'll land like a little toe in the water, like, "I'm testing this. Is this a safe place to talk about this? Is he open to this conversation?" Um, and very often I'll say things like, "Boy, that's outside of my own experience, and I'm not even sure exactly how to phrase a question, but can you help me understand what that feels like?
yeah,
Can you tell me more about that so that I can begin to understand?" And that's not to say that people owe me an education, right? I got to do my research and my reading and figure out what I can before I go into an interview, but I do want them to know that I'm curious, and if that's something they want to explore, um, I want to hear more about it. I say that the root question of the project is what does peace mean to you? But that's also just become our, I call it the gateway question.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
it's
It's a
just the
simple, but it's a
opportunity.
profound question. What does peace mean to you? Who do you trust? That's another good one.
Yeah. Yeah. When have you found unexpected courage? When have you bridged a divide? When has somebody been kind to you when you didn't expect it? And so, what these conversations turn out to be is sort of this articulation of our best selves. Yeah, an acknowledgement of when we've failed as a society or as an individual, but what are those small little things that we've been able to do to move past that, to build healing, to see things in a new way? Those are the things that are really interesting to me.
So we're talking about some deep subjects, but I'm also really curious about your process. So how do you identify your subjects? How do you arrange your conversations and photography sessions? How do you prepare? I'm curious about the whole like how did I'm curious about the whole thing.
Yeah, yeah. When I started this, it was in my own backyard. The first book I did was all stories out of Minnesota. So that was really easy, right? Everyone was just down the road or whatever. But as I started doing national versions, and now we're doing international versions, I spent a month or 3 weeks in Northern Ireland.
Northern Ireland, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, doing stories about how people have navigated their sectarian violence and how they've worked towards building healing in their country 30 years after the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. We'll be going to Rwanda this summer to explore how they moved through their genocide. And when I'm working outside of my own backyard, it becomes really important that I have an ally and an advocate in that community. So when I was going down to the border, you can't just park your truck on the side of the road and say, "Hey, you come here, let's talk about this thing." That's not, I mean, it might work, but it's not really dependable. So what I would do is I would find somebody, in this case, it was somebody who graduated from the same high school as me. Her name was India Aubrey. She was working with a nonprofit down there. She was leading a nonprofit called Voices from the Border, and they were helping to support some people who were asylum seekers. And she had this really deep network of people who she knew down along the border. And so India understood what we were trying to do. She had some capacity to introduce me to some folks. And so before I even came to town, I had 6 or 7 interviews lined up. Um, that's where I started. And everybody I interviewed, I would ask at the end of the interview, who else do I need to meet? Who else has an interesting perspective? Who else should I get to know? And so, those 6 or 7 interviews I did in the first week, but then I would stay down there for 3 or 4 or 5 weeks so that that network could continue to grow.
Mm.
And as I would look at that network, I'm like, okay, now who have I not heard from? Who else do I need to find? And then that's the journalism part. Then you got to get on the phone, you got to send the emails, you have to get 57 rejection uh, emails, and then be persistent enough to find the 58th person who will say, "Yeah, sure, I'll sit down with you."
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the process of identifying people. Every once in a while, it falls in my lap. Like I
Yeah.
was in Columbus, Mississippi, just wanting to get a coffee and do my laundry and edit all of the interviews that I had done over the last couple of weeks because I was feeling behind. And in the coffee shop, there's a dude in front of me whose name was Neil. And we started talking, and I'm like, so what's your deal, Neil? And he said, well, because rhyming is fun. And and okay, so this is a good time to say I love really earnest work and conversations, but I also think that there's room for whimsy in the world. That's why my van was named Vinny Van Gogh and my dog is named Road Trip. But so I said, "What's your deal, Neil?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm just paddling my canoe 6,500 miles across America to remember what's beautiful about this place again."
Oh
And I,
man.
oh, I'm not going to get a day off after all, am I? What are you doing this afternoon, Neil? And we sat down and we did an interview.
That's
So
awesome.
sometimes serendipity is even smarter than me, but I do like to make sure when I go into a community that I'm going to be productive. And so I try to do that groundwork and that research beforehand to make sure I'm going to talk to some interesting folks.
When I was in the New York theater scene, I love doing Shakespeare, especially studying some of the more challenging characters like Iago and Richard III, because these are characters that we don't necessarily identify with, but Shakespeare writes them so fully that he does a good job of allowing us at moments to see the bad guy's humanity.
Hmm.
Have you ever found yourself sitting across from somebody whose views you just found so reprehensible? And then, but did the camera or the conversations help you find that flicker of grace or humanity in them anyway?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think reprehensible. I don't think I've gotten that far down on the scale.
Okay.
Uh, but certainly, I mean, people who voted differently than me, people who I look at from afar and say, man, I don't quite get that. You know,
Yeah.
I don't quite understand that. And certainly interviews where we've started the conversation and inside my brain, I say, ooh, this is going to be tough. You know, this is going to be a challenge to find that little nugget of good, to find that place where we connect. Um, but it has never not happened.
Yeah.
I've never gotten to the end of an interview and said, "Oh, I can't use that. That took a turn." You know, we always, and part of that is on me, to uncover that as a journalist and a storyteller to sort of help nudge the conversation in that direction. Some of it, I think, is just the truth that we all have that goodness and wisdom and beauty in us. Um, Sometimes it's under a few more layers
Yeah.
than others, or sometimes it's a little harder to find.
So being part of Weave, the social fabric project, when we talk about yeah, I mean weaving the social fabric, that sounds all, lovely and good and metaphorical, but you actually see the threads, for lack of a better word, up close.
Mhm.
Where do you think the fabric is most frayed right now, and where is it surprisingly strong?
I mean, partisan politics, we're in a uniquely difficult spot in our country. Um, and most conversations very quickly will ferret out, well, who did you vote for and what side of this are you on? And then everything else falls in place. Then that's all we need to know about that person. And and we'll either embrace them or dismiss them. And that's the end of the story. And I find that really fraught and I find that really disheartening and I find it really worrisome for how we move forward past that. I also find that there are some really powerful and moneyed interests who love that
Yeah.
dynamic,
Yeah, they
you
built
know, and
their
they're,
business plan on that.
yeah, their business plan and there's a lot of money in it. Meanwhile, people who are looking for subtle nuance and complexities and surprising connections, that is less profitable and um, less appealing to a lot of people. It doesn't have the whiz bang. It doesn't have that really, exciting spark that some people are looking for, and so it doesn't feed that part of our brains. Um, what was the rest of the question?
uh,
Oh, and
wh-
where are
yeah,
the
where's the fabric strong?
Yeah, I mean, we see it in Minneapolis going on right now. You know, I don't know what the news looks like from Southern California. I don't know what your headlines look like and what sort of footage they're showing. Um, but as there are people who are doing really good work. You know, there are folks who are setting up networks to deliver groceries to people who may be afraid to leave their houses right now. You know, and wherever your politics lie, the truth is that there are a lot of people who are citizens and residents who are feeling the pressure too. It's just not the worst of the worst that you hear about in the headlines who are under pressure right now. It's regular good uh, citizens who happen to have a brown shade to their skin,
Yeah.
who do not want to go out to the grocery store because there could be some really difficult encounters on the way to and from the grocery store. And so there are folks who are setting up networks of people who look like me who can pick up the groceries and drop them off at their house. It's a really easy gesture. It helps in a really difficult moment. There are, chefs who own restaurants who are cooking food and giving it away for free on the street. My wife works for largest food bank in Minnesota, and the pressure on the food bank right now is really high. So there are chefs who are just going out cooking and giving away free food. We're not asking if you need it. If you feel like you need it, come and get it. We'll do that. There are people who are leading community singing vigils as a way to stand in solidarity and to be together. There are networks of people in neighborhoods who are checking on their friends and their neighbors, saying, "Are you okay? Is there anything I can do for you?" In a way that we maybe haven't seen in a while in our country. And so there are the places where I see a strong social fabric. In the wake of George Floyd's killing in Minnesota in 2020, I know that a lot of the headlines, even here, looked like burning buildings and angry people out on the street, and that was true. Frustrated folks who were showing up in response to it. That was not the only story. The rest of I would go out every morning and I would see hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were sweeping up broken glass and boarding up buildings and were checking on their neighbors and setting up food stashes and saying, "Hey, if you need something, let us help you," and making sure that their neighbors were okay. And that sort of response makes me pretty proud to be Minnesotan.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we've been talking about a piece of my mind, which, by the way, a piece of my mind.org, PEACE of my mind.org. But I also wanted to ask you about the audio reflection course. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for asking about that. We've got this deep archive of stories. I've done hundreds of oral histories with people. Um, and we started repackaging some of them in this audio course. It's called 40 Days Toward Deeper Listening, Hearing the Heart of Humanity. And really, every day it's to deliver one of these stories to you as about a 10-minute audio clip. So you get a little introduction, you get a 6 or 7 minute audio clip of the person telling their story. And again, these are veterans, these are people with a terminal diagnosis, these are people who are unhoused. And after that 6 or 7 minute audio clip, you get a couple of prompts. If you're doing it by yourself, you could do this, as journaling or just reflection. If you're doing it with a group, it could use these prompts to open up small group discussions, those sorts of things. And it's sort of divided across the country. And so you've got people in the Northeast, you've got people in the South, the Southwest, the Mountain States, sharing these really difficult and different experiences, but sort of celebrating how they've risen above that and where they've found human connection. So that's a new resource that we have. It's on our website. Like everything else, if people are interested in it, they can click through and there's some free chapters they can look at to see if they like the vibe and the experience. But I'm super excited about it, and it's just another way to repurpose these stories and get them in people's hands so that they can do some of that heart work for themselves.
So that's a good segue to our TP&R question. Um, and that is our talk politics and religion without killing each other question. And it's basically that. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, and perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences, people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, who get their news from different sources than we do? How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
Yeah, I mean, for sure it's possible. And it's a choice. I have a friend who likes to say we do best what we do most, which is to say, if you want to get good at something, you've got to practice something. And I don't think right now we are practicing the art of weaving. I don't
Mhm.
think right now we're practicing the art of finding the common ground. I think we're like diving in and looking for the jugular. We're looking for that really contentious point. And I think so often I think we need to be patient with the process. I think really often we will step right into that most contentious issue. We will dive right into, what do you feel about ICE? What do you feel about the election? Where are you at with this? Where are you at with that? And we step right into the fire, and then we get surprised when we get burned. and I think that we have to be more patient than that. I think we have to do the ground level work of building relationship and trust, and we need to move towards that stuff. And sometimes when that happens, when we feel that tension really ratcheting up, it's okay to back off a little bit and say, you know what? Let's talk about kids. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about the other thing and return to that common ground where we can sort of get our footing again before we start venturing towards that tough stuff. And
Yeah.
that doesn't feel edifying, right? Like you feel like you want to just, let's get in there and do the fight. I don't think that's ever really effective. It might feel good for a little bit, but what does it really accomplish? So I think, we have to be patient to build those relationships. I mean, it's really one of the things that the Social Fabric Project is good at. And I'm really excited to be a part of that network of these people across the country who are trying to practice those skills. And if you go to weavers.org, you're going to find an online community where you can practice some of that stuff. You're going to find some learning resources. You're going to find little micro grants that can support, you want to get people together in your community for dinner to talk about a particular issue that your community is facing. You might find a little micro grant from Weavers to help support that.
Mm,
It's important to remember, for the people who believe that connection is possible, it's important to remember that you're not alone in that.
mm,
I think it's really important to recognize that there is a community of people who are doing this. I think it's important to recognize that if you think it's possible, that doesn't mean you're nuts. That whatever you hear swirling around in the rhetoric and the headlines of the day, something else might also be true.
yeah. Yeah. I keep on coming back to that proverb about the blind men, three blind men touching an elephant and
Hmm.
describing what they're touching. And one's touching the ear and he describes it like a blanket. One's touching the side of the elephant and describes it, oh, it's a wall. One's touching the tail and says it's like a rope. What about the three different people who have three very different experiences all describing it, and the three of them together at least give us a fuller picture of what's the totality of it. But I love what you said. It's a choice. So it's a choice to choose to practice focusing on the relational over the transactional, to
Hmm.
focus to practice curiosity over the contest, curiosity over contentiousness. I love a lot I really appreciate a lot of what you're saying. Um, Before we go, you do get to turn the tables on me at least once here. Do you have any questions for me?
Yeah, I mean, Corey, I'm curious what you see as this could take more than a couple of minutes, but what do you see as our biggest challenge as a community, as a collective, and where do you think the potential lies for moving forward and sort of transcending that challenge?
That is a big question. So the last part of it first, I will say a lot of the work that you're doing, I think in human connection. A lot of the times when I'm able to circumvent those things that keep us divided, for example, social media can serve as something that exacerbates our animus towards each other, and throw in these rhetorical grenades at each other. Uh,
Mhm.
that's just how the algorithms tend to work on a lot of these platforms. Whereas whenever I am successful at circumventing that by going old school and saying, dude, you want to go grab a beer?
Yeah,
you
right.
know, once we're sitting down and hanging out, we realize that, oh, you're not that guy. You're not that proxy for them. You're an actual human being, and I'm here hanging out and talking to you, and we're having fun together. And it could be about the subject that we were talking about, some political subject or religious subject, or it could be about this dude's Harley that he just got. Or it could be all of the above. We could talk about, sports and the Harley, and then we could mix in a little bit of politics. But then even politics, we find that when we're together, it's about, we tend to, there's more of a tendency to be able to focus on values and priorities, which allows us to then talk about maybe the actual policies. Because a lot of times the values and the priorities are really similar, but the policy prescriptions are different, you know? So that's the last part of it is human connection, which is what I love. A lot of what I love about what I've learned about what you're doing, the human connection. But what is that the first half of your question? What's keeping us divided?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. What is one of the biggest challenges we face,
Mm,
and how are we going to transcend that? I think you might have just answered both of them.
yeah. Well, the biggest challenge is there's a lot, but it's all ingredients in a evil brew, an evil recipe. Some of it is just the leaders that set the wrong precedents. Some of it is the media is focused on the story, and it's more interesting to focus on this crazy character that's spewing all kinds of hatred, and that makes for good TV.
Yeah.
The current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, if he understands anything, he understands maybe what'll get good ratings, and that's just being hyperbolic and hate and malice and all this stuff that it's good for ratings, but it's not good for our humanity.
Mhm.
So addressing that is like I said, is just circumventing all that nonsense. Whether it's the algorithms that are exacerbating some of those problems or turning off our favorite TV channel, whether it's Fox News or some other program that comes from a different point of view, turning that stuff off and actually sitting down with another human being. So I don't
Well,
know.
and at the end of the day, Corey, I think that's what we can control.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't control what goes on over in the White House. I can't control national policy. I mean, I make my calls to my legislators and all of those things, but what I can really control is my community and the folks who are around me and how am I going to treat them and how do we build, resilience and connection and courage in those places. And that's, um, those when Brian Stevenson, he runs the Equal Justice
Yeah.
Initiative, and
Yeah.
he talks a lot about being in proximity and getting close to the issues. And so for me, seeing the headlines and hearing the rhetoric, um, I'm interested in getting close to the people who are impacted by these issues and who are involved in these issues. So that's been part of the methodology for a piece of my mind. If I want to talk about the border, let's go to the border and let's meet the people. If I want to talk about homelessness, I want to talk to people who are homeless. I want to talk to people who are insecure in their housing. I want to talk to people involved with the agencies that are finding creative solutions to some of these really big challenges. And I find that when I get close to the issues and when I'm patient to see the people who are involved in them, that I understand them in a whole different way.
My friend Liz Joyner, who runs Village Square, a nonprofit who does a lot of this work down in Tallahassee, Florida, her expression is, "It's hard to hate somebody up close." And the funny thing is I've heard you say a version of that a number of times. So it's hard to hate somebody up close. So before we go, I want to make sure folks know how can folks follow you, find more information about A Piece of My Mind, the audio reflection course, and all of the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Corey. A piece of my mind.org. Again, it's PEACE. A piece of my mind.org. You'll find us on Facebook. Just type in a piece of my mind. We've got a podcast at whatever platform. If you search for a piece of my mind, as long as you spell it PEACE, you will find us. And on Instagram, where we're most active, because I'm a visual person, it's the acronym. It's APOMM stories, and we'll pop up.
Awesome. Awesome. Terrific. And I'll have that in the show notes. APOMM stories on IG. Okay, good. I'll have that in the show notes so folks can click right there or, go to it yourself. We did cover a lot. Is there anything important we haven't discussed you'd like to add?
Oh man, there's so much. I think, did we talk about the projection of these photos downtown Minneapolis?
I think I didn't hit record yet.
Oh, so in case we didn't talk about it, these I Am Human stories that we're doing, we're starting to project those downtown Minneapolis.
Oh
And
man.
again, just as a way to say to the community, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. And you'll go on our Instagram feed, you'll see some of the practice projections that we've been doing there. I'm learning as I go, but it's pretty exciting to see them 30 feet wide on the side of these buildings.
That's awesome. I am human. big and projected. And yes, I love it. John, this was awesome, man. I'm so glad to get to know you and your work. I hope it's not the last time we hang out.
Yeah,
Um,
likewise, Corey.
yeah, thanks again, man. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for a great conversation. I love the questions. I can't wait to see it come out so I can share it with all my people.
Yeah, yeah. This will be coming out, I think on the 16th, but I'll definitely hit you up, and Maria with, with Weave, so that everybody has some links and stuff. So, yeah, this is a good one. So,
Yeah,
um,
thanks for the work you do, Corey.
yeah, you bet.
Talk
And
to you.
as always, we'd like to thank Pew Research Center for making today's conversation possible. We're grateful to our good friends at the Village Square for coming alongside us in this work. And if you dig what we're doing here, engage with us on any of the socials. I'm easy to find at Corey S. Nathan. That's Corey S as in Sam, Nathan at Corey S. Nathan, especially over on Substack. We love it over there. Don't forget to subscribe and join the conversation now. Go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, and have a great week.